The Magnolia Cafe sat on the corner of Birchwood Avenue and 5th Street like a secret that the rest of the city had somehow agreed to keep. It was not the kind of place that appeared in travel guides or food blogs. Its wooden sign had faded to a pale gold. Its menu was handwritten on a chalkboard that the owner around warm-bellied Greek woman named Dora updated every morning with whatever had arrived fresh from the market. The chairs did not match. The floor creaked in 3 specific spots that every regular knew by heart, and the coffee, brewed in a machine that looked older than democracy itself, was the best in a 50-mile radius. Meyer Osei had worked there for 3 years. She was 27 years old, with deep brown skin that caught the morning light like polished mahogany. Natural hair she wore in a high puff on Mondays and loose twists every other day, and hands that could carry for full plates without trembling. She had a degree in environmental science from State University framed, gathering dust, in the closet of her studio apartment, and she had plans, real plans, sketched in a green notebook she kept under the counter, to one day open a community garden cooperative in the South End neighborhood where she'd grown up. But for now, she carried plates. And on Thursday mornings, she watched the woman in the window table. She had first appeared 6 weeks ago, a sleek black van with a ramp, pulling into the accessible spot outside. The driver, a compact man in his 50s with a military bearing, had come around, lowered the ramp, and waited as a wheelchair emerged from the vehicle carrying a woman who looked like she had been assembled from pure authority. She was perhaps 35, though she had the kind of face that made age feel irrelevant. Her complexion was a warm ivory, flushed slightly at the cheeks. Her hair was dark and cut sharply at the jaw, precise, like everything else about her. She wore a charcoal blazer over a cream blouse, slacks with a crease that could have cut glass, and no jewelry except a single platinum watch on her left wrist. Her hands rested in her lap with deliberate stillness, and her eyes, a gray so pale they were almost silver, moved over the cafe with an assessment that was neither warm nor cold. It was simply exact. She had wheeled herself to the window table, the one with the extra space Dora had created when a local disability advocacy group had politely but firmly suggested some modifications. Opened a laptop and ordered, without looking up, a black coffee and a poached egg on SOURDOUGH. Her name, Maya had eventually learned from the credit card she used to pay, was Victoria Crane. And Victoria Crane, as the city's business pages would tell you, was the CEO of Crane and Holloway Architectural Group, one of the most powerful design firms in the region, responsible for the new waterfront development, the Children's Hospital expansion, and no fewer than 3 award-winning sustainable housing projects. She had been named to Forbes' Regional Power list for 4 consecutive years. She had won the Urban Design Excellence Award twice. She was also, Maya had noticed, profoundly and deliberately alone. She spoke to no one except to order. She never looked up from her laptop long enough to make eye contact. When Dora had once tried to make small talk about the weather, Victoria had answered in 3 words and returned her gaze to her screen. She tipped exactly 20%, calculated to the cent, and left precisely at 9:15 every Thursday, without variation. She was a puzzle, and Meyer, who had always loved puzzles, could not stop looking at her. It happened on a Thursday in early October, when the wind had begun to turn and the maples outside the cafe were going amber at the edges. Meyer was moving too fast. She knew it even as it happened, her foot catching on the slightly raised edge of the floorboard near table 4, the tray tilting, the mug of black coffee sliding off in a slow, horrible arc and landing directly in Victoria Crane's lap. The sound Victoria made was not a scream. It was a sharp, controlled intake of breath, the sound of a person who had trained herself not to react, fighting against a genuine, involuntary response. Meyer was already moving, already apologizing, already reaching for napkins. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Are you burned? Did it?" She stopped herself, because the coffee had been sitting for a moment before being carried over, and it was warm, but not scalding. and also because she had just placed a fistful of napkins directly onto Victoria Crane's lap without asking, which was, "Stop." Victoria's voice was quiet, not angry, just very, very controlled. Maya stopped. Victoria looked down at her slacks. The coffee had spread across her right thigh, dark against the charcoal wool. She took one of the napkins from Maya's hand with precise fingers and pressed it to the fabric. "I can't feel heat below my mid-torso," Victoria said, in the tone of someone delivering a quarterly report. "So I'm not burned." "Oh," Maya exhaled. "Okay, good. Still, I'm so sorry. I don't know what." "You cut your foot on the floorboard." Victoria glanced toward the spot. "It's slightly raised. Has been for months, I'd imagine." "You should tell the owner." Maya stared at her. Yes, you're right. I will." Victoria returned to her laptop. Then, after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be meaningful, she said, "You can bring me another coffee." "Of course." Maya gathered the fallen mug. "It's on us. And your breakfast." You've apologized for times." Victoria's eyes didn't leave the screen. Once was sufficient. Maya almost smiled. She caught it just in time and retreated to the counter, her heart doing something strange and fluttery that she absolutely did not have time to examine. She brought the coffee back. She set it down carefully. She fixed the floorboard herself that afternoon with a small hammer and a nail she found in Dora's utility closet, because that was the kind of person Maya was. The following Thursday, Victoria Crane came back, and this time, when Maya set down the black coffee and the poached egg on sourdough, Victoria looked up. "You fixed it," she said. "I did." Victoria held her gaze for a moment, those pale silver eyes direct and unreadable. Then she said, "Thank you," and looked back at her screen. It was not much. It was 2 words. But Maya carried them home with her the evening like they were something precious. And she wasn't sure what to do with that. By November, Thursday had become Maya's favorite day of the week, which she recognized as a problem. She was not, she told herself firmly, developing feelings for a customer. That was the most cliched, predictable, professionally inadvisable thing she could possibly do. Victoria Crane was wealthy, guarded, brilliant, and the kind of person who calculated her tips to the exact cent. She was not the kind of person who chatted with waitresses. She was not the kind of person who needed anyone. And yet, small things accumulated. The way snow does, you don't notice each individual flake. And then one morning you look out the window and everything has changed. Victoria had begun, imperceptibly at first, to arrive 5 minutes later than usual on the Thursdays when the weather was bad, as if she had factored in the extra time the ramp took when it was cold, and had adjusted her schedule rather than allow herself to be seen struggling. Maya noticed this and began having the coffee ready 2 minutes after Victoria's usual new arrival time. So it was always fresh. Victoria noticed that Maya noticed. She said nothing, but she started leaving a slightly higher tip. Not dramatically, not the sudden 25% of a person making a grand gesture, but a gradual creep. 21%, 22%, as if she were adjusting an equation. Then one Thursday in November, a thing happened. Maya had left her green notebook on the window table by mistake. When she'd gone to see another customer, she'd been sketching out a planting schedule during a slow moment, tucked in the corner of the table while Victoria worked, and when she came back for it, Victoria was looking at it, not reading it. The notebook was closed, but looking at it the way a person looks at something that has caught their attention unexpectedly. "Sorry," Maya said, reaching for it. "That's mine. What is it?" The question was simple and direct. The way Victoria's questions always were. No preamble, no softening. "Plans," Maya said, "for a community garden project I want to start in the South End." A pause. Victoria looked at her, really looked. The kind of looking she usually reserved for her laptop screen. "What kind of community garden?" "Cooperative model. Low-income families can lease plots. We'd offer workshops, soil science, composting, water conservation. A portion of the yield would go to a food pantry on Clement Street." Maya hesitated. Because she never talked about this at work, it was too private, too important to risk having someone be dismissive about it. I've been working on the business plan for 2 years. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The South End has a reclaimed industrial lot on Decker Avenue. City auctioned it 18 months ago. Do you know who bought it?" "No, and nonprofit land trust. They've been looking for anchor tenants with community development proposals." She picked up her coffee. "You should contact them." Maya stared at her. "How do you know that?" Victoria returned to her screen. "Because I designed 3 of the buildings on Decker Avenue and I make it my business to know what happens to urban land in this city." She said it without arrogance as a simple statement of professional fact. But Maya felt something shift in the air between them. Some change in pressure, like the moment before weather breaks. "Thank you," Meyer said softly. Victoria did not respond, but the corner of her mouth, just the very corner, moved in a way that might, in another person, in better light, have been the beginning of a smile. The December storm was supposed to be a minor one for 2 to 6 inches, the forecasters said, which in this city meant people would grumble and buy extra milk and mostly go about their business. But the storm did not read forecasts. By Thursday morning, it had dropped 14 inches and was still going, and the city had gone quiet in that particular snow-muffled way that felt almost sacred. Meyer had walked to work. She lived 12 blocks away and had good boots and arrived to find Dora alone in the cafe, looking simultaneously delighted by the coziness and anxious about her pipes. "Nobody coming today," Dora announced, waving at the white blurred windows. "You can go home, Mayamu. I'll stay a bit," Meyer said. She told herself this was because she was responsible and Dora shouldn't be alone. She did not examine the other reason. At 9:07 minutes later than Victoria's storm-adjusted arrival time, the black van pulled up. Maya watched through the window as the driver, whose name she'd learned was Harold, came round with visible concern on his face and began lowering the ramp. The snow had been shoveled from the sidewalk the city plow had come through, but the ramp landing was on a slight angle, and the snow had packed along one edge. She saw the moment it happened, the wheelchair's front wheel hitting the packed ridge, the chair tilting, and Victoria's hand slamming onto the wheels to catch herself, a reflex. Practiced and efficient, but the tilt was more than she'd anticipated, and for a moment Meyer was already out the door, coat half on, boots untied, moving through the snow before she'd made any conscious decision to move. She reached the ramp just as Harold steadied the chair from behind. Victoria was upright, both hands gripping the wheels. Her jaw sat with a particular kind of rigid control that Meyer was beginning to recognize as the face Victoria wore when she was most vulnerable. "I've got it," Victoria said to Harold. To Meyer, to the universe. "I know," Meyer said, "but the snow packed on the left side of the ramp. I can clear it." She pulled a small snow brush from the exterior hook by the door. Dora kept one there for exactly this reason and cleared the region for efficient strokes. Then she stepped back. Victoria willed herself the rest of the way up without assistance. Through the door Maya held open, and to the window table. She didn't say anything for a long time. Maya brought the coffee, set it down. "I don't need to be rescued," Victoria said, without looking up. "I know," Maya said again. "I cleared the ramp. That's a property maintenance issue, not a rescue." A silence, long enough that Maya thought she should leave. "It used to be easier," Victoria said, very quietly, to her coffee cup. "In the beginning, I had more upper body strength. I trained for it. I was very systematic about it." A pause. "I've had some setbacks. Medically, the last year has been." She stopped, pressed her lips together, reopened her laptop. "It doesn't matter." But it did matter. Maya could see that it mattered enormously. It was in the rigid line of Victoria's shoulders, in the too controlled stillness of her hands, in the way she had nearly said something real and then armored back up with the speed of someone who'd had years of practice. Meyer sat down, not in a customer chair. She pulled over the small stool she used when she was rolling silverware during slow periods and sat with it beside the table, not across from Victoria, just alongside her. Victoria looked at her. The silver eyes were unreadable, but present, more present than usual. You don't have to talk about it, Maya said. I'm just going to sit here for a minute. The cafe's empty. Doors in the back worrying about her pipes. You don't have to perform being fine if you're not. A very long silence. I'm fine, Victoria said. Okay, Maya said. They sat together in the snow-quiet cafe for 20 minutes. Victoria worked on her laptop. Maya rolled silverware. They didn't speak again. But when Victoria left at 9:23, a full 8 minutes past her usual departure time, she paused at the door. Your garden project, she said, without turning round. The land trust on Decker is run by a woman named Simone Park. Tell her Victoria Crane suggested you call. Then she was gone, and the snow kept falling. And Meyer sat very still at the window table for a long moment before she began to understand, in the quiet accumulating way of snow, that she was in serious trouble. Harold Booker had worked for Victoria Crane for 6 years, first as a physical therapist's assistant at the rehabilitation center where Victoria had spent 14 months after the accident. Then, as she'd rebuilt her life with characteristic ferocity, as her driver, aide, and the closest thing she had to a friend. He was not a talkative man. He was, however, observant, and he had noticed, in the way of someone who loves a person and worries about them quietly, that his employer had begun to take slightly longer than necessary getting in and out of the cafe on Birchwood -1 Avenue, that she had started ordering a second coffee some Thursdays, that she had twice mentioned, in the flat, offhand tone she used when something actually interested her, a community garden project in the South, and Harold knew about loneliness. He'd watched a hollow Victoria out over the 6 years he'd known her, watched her build her professional success with one hand and her personal walls with the other, until the walls were taller than the achievements, and she lived entirely within them. He had met her when she was 3 months post-injury in a rehabilitation facility, when she'd been furious and grief-stricken and absolutely unwilling to show either. She had been in a car accident, a drunk driver on the interstate, a moment of terrible geometry that had compressed her T6 vertebra and changed everything. She had been 30 years old. She had been, by all accounts, formidable even before the injury. Afterward, she had become something else. Not diminished, never diminished, but sealed. Like a house with all its windows shuttered, still full of life inside, nobody coming in. He didn't say any of this to Myro, say, the waitress who brought his employer's coffee and looked at her like she was worth looking at. He didn't interfere in Victoria's life. He simply drove the van, maintained the ramp, and on a cold Tuesday in December, when he happened to be at the counter getting his own tea while Meyer was writing something in her green notebook, he said, she hasn't really smiled in 3 years. Maya looked up. I'm sorry. Harold took his tea, just making conversation. He went to wait in the van. Meyer looked out the window for a long moment, her pen hovering over her notebook. Then she wrote, call Simone Park, Decker Avenue Land Trust. Victoria Crane suggested it. And below that, in smaller letters, what does a smile on that face even look like? Simone Park turned out to be a brisk, warm, utterly no-nonsense woman who ran the Decker Avenue Community Land Trust out of a cluttered office above a print shop and greeted Maya's call with, Victoria Crane sent you. Good Lord. She must like you. She's never sent anyone to me before, where she's a regular at the cafe where I work, Meyer said carefully. A dash had double quotes. Simone's tone made clear she had opinions about this. Bring me your business plan. Let's talk. The meeting with Simone took 2 hours and left Meyer feeling the specific dizziness of a dream that might actually be becoming real. The lot on Decker was not only available for a pilot project. Simone had a small grant ready for exactly this kind of anchor tenant. Grant money that had been sitting in an account for 8 months waiting for the right proposal. Your plan is good, Simone said, flipping through the green notebook, which Maya had translated into a proper document for the meeting. It's thorough. The soil remediation plan is particularly strong. Most people skip that for brownfield sites. Environmental science background, Meyer said. Good. We can move to a proposal stage. by February if you're ready." Simone looked at her over her glasses. "You should know Victoria Crane designed 2 of the buildings at the end of Decker. I'd normally recuse any personal connections, but since all she did was refer you, and your proposal stands entirely on its own merit, I don't see a conflict. We're not personally connected," Maya said. "She's a customer." Simone looked at her for a long moment. "Sure," she said, in exactly the tone Harold had used. Maya stopped by the cafe on her way home. It was her day off, but she'd forgotten her jacket and found a card on the window table. A business card, cream stock, embossed letters. Victoria Crane, CEO, Crane and Holloway Architectural Group. And on the back, in small, precise handwriting, "In case the Decker meeting is useful." Victoria arrived Thursday to find the post-it. She sat in front of it for a moment before peeling it carefully from the glass and folding it into the inner pocket of her blazer. Harold, watching from the van, texted his wife a single word, "Progress." His wife texted back a row of small yellow hearts. V.C. Meyer stood holding it for a long time. Then she went behind the counter, found a post-it note, wrote 3 words on it, and stuck it to the inside of the window where Victoria would see it Thursday morning before Meyer arrived. The note said she loved it. When Meyer arrived for her shift at 7, a full 2 hours before Victoria's usual arrival, she found on the window table a folded piece of cream-colored paper. Inside, in Victoria's precise handwriting, "Congratulations. For what it's worth, your planting schedule for Zone 6 billion has a timing issue in the 3rd rotation. Garlic should go in 6 weeks earlier than you've noted. I looked it up. I don't know why I looked it up." Meyer read this 3 times. Then she went into the back and pressed the piece of paper against her chest and stood there for a moment doing something that Dora, who had poked her head in to ask about the milk order, would later describe to her sister as glowing, like a lamp, the whole morning. It was Meyer who asked. She had thought about it for 2 weeks, talked herself out of it for one of those weeks, argued herself back into it in a single evening, when she read an article about the South End Community Garden Initiative in the local paper, a small mention, 3 sentences, and felt such a surge of joy that she wanted to share it with someone. And the first face that appeared in her mind was pale and silver-eyed and perpetually composed. She wrote it on a post-it. She was aware this had become their medium, which was perhaps the most introverted, architecturally appropriate communication method imaginable, and she was charmed by it. The note said, "I'm celebrating the Decker proposal submission on Friday at 7 p.m. Taverna Coaster on Merchant Street. Dora's cousin owns it, so we'd have a good table. Would you like to come? No pressure. I know you probably have things." She left it on the window table Thursday morning before Victoria arrived. Victoria read it. She set it down. She picked up her coffee. She set it down. She picked up the note and read it again. Harold, who had come in for his tea, was facing tactfully away from the window table and examining a painting of Santorini on the cafe wall with great concentration. When Victoria left at 9:17, she had written 1 word on the back of the post-it. Yes. Meyer arrived at Taverna Coaster 20 minutes early, which was unlike her. She had changed her outfit 3 times. She was wearing, finally, a dark green wrap dress that her mother had told her made her look like someone worth knowing, and her hair down, and small gold earrings. She had told herself, with great firmness, that this was not a date. It was a celebration. She had invited a person she respected and wanted to thank. That was all. She had also, while doing this, applied perfume, which she almost never did. The table Dora's cousin Costas had given them was in a side alcove slightly elevated by a single step, which Maya had called ahead about, and Costas had immediately solved by extending the table into the main floor area where access was level, with a privacy-creating screen of potted olive trees. Victoria arrived at 7:02. She was wearing, and Meyer was entirely unprepared for this, a deep burgundy blouse under a tailored black jacket, her dark hair down rather than back, which Maya had never seen, and small silver earrings in the shape of something architectural, though Maya couldn't make out what. She looked, Maya thought, and then stopped thinking because the thought was too large to complete. You look, Maya said, and caught herself. Victoria looked at her with those direct silver eyes. So do you, she said, simply, and wheeled herself to the table. They ordered. Costas descended on them with alarming enthusiasm. He had clearly been briefed by Dor and brought wine and olives and bread without being asked, and addressed Victoria with natural and self-conscious warmth, asking her opinion on a structural question he had about the restaurant's new extension, which led to a 10-minute conversation about load-bearing walls that Maya listened to with her chin in her hand, watching Victoria's face come alive with professional animation. It was the most Maya had ever heard her speak. Sorry, Victoria said when Costas had finally retreated. I monopolized him. Don't apologize. I loved it. Maya poured more wine. You're different when you talk about buildings. A pause. Different how lit up? Maya said, honestly, like someone turned something on inside. Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking at her wine glass. My ex-wife used to say I was only truly alive when I was working, she said. It came out with the flat effect of something that had been said to her as a criticism, internalized and repeated as a fact. That sounds like something that was meant to hurt you, Maya said carefully. Victoria looked up. It was accurate. It was a weapon, Maya said. That's different from accurate. She paused. You were lit up talking about load-bearing walls at a dinner table on a Friday night. That's not a malfunction. That's just who you are. A silence. Victoria's fingers turned her wine glass slowly. She left. Victoria said, 8 months after the accident. She said she hadn't signed up for. She stopped. It doesn't matter. It was for years ago. It matters, Maya said softly. Victoria looked at her with the direct, unguarded gaze she almost never used. You're very. She stopped again. Very present, Victoria said. Finally, you're very present. Most people aren't. Maya felt the word land somewhere in her chest and stayed there. Tell me about the first building you ever designed, Maya said, and something extraordinary happened. Victoria Crane smiled. It started small, just a shift at the corner of her mouth. Then it widened, slowly, like sunlight moving across a stone floor, until it reached her eyes, which changed entirely when she smiled. Going from silver and precise to something warmer, something with depth in it. I was 19, Victoria said. Architecture school, first-year studio project. It was supposed to be a bus shelter. And I designed a small library, 800 square feet, complete with a reading nook in the roof structure. She shook her head, still smiling. My professor said it was the best non-assignment she'd ever seen and failed me for not following the brief. Maya laughed, really laughed. The full-throated kind. Did you appeal? Edie built a scale model of the library and left it on her desk with a note. What did the note say? Victoria's smile deepened. A bus shelter is a place people wait to leave. A library is a place people choose to stay. I am interested in the latter. How old were you? 19. Of course you were, Maya said, delighted. They stayed at Taverna Costa until 10:45. Long past the kitchen's last order. Costas periodically appearing to refill their glasses and then disappearing with the tact of someone who understood that something important was happening at table 7. When they finally moved toward the door, Maya in her coat, Victoria in hers, Harold waiting outside in the van. Maya said, this was really good. Yes, Victoria said. She said it the way she said most true things. Simply and directly and without decoration. At the door, they stopped. There was a moment, the particular, weighted kind of moment that has no reliable name, but is absolutely unmistakable, and in it, Victoria looked at Maya with those silver eyes, and Maya looked back, and neither of them said anything. And the night was cold, and the street lights made halos in the winter mist. Thursday, Victoria said finally. Thursday. Maya agreed. Harold drove Victoria home. In the car, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Harold, yes, what do you know about Zone 6 billion garlic planting schedule? Harold kept his face very still. Not a thing, he said, but I expect you could find out. January brought a new pattern. Victoria still came on Thursdays, but now she also came on Tuesdays. And she stayed longer, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes Meyer would sit across from her in the slow mid-morning, 2 cups of coffee between them, and they would talk. They talked about architecture and sales science. They talked about the South End, which Victoria had designed buildings in without ever knowing the community that lived among them, a gap she seemed now thoughtful about. They talked about Maya's mother, who ran a hair salon and grew tomatoes in buckets on her fire escape, and Victoria's father, an engineer who had raised her alone in a house full of blueprints and mathematical silence after her mother left when Victoria was 7. He wasn't unkind, Victoria said once. He just communicated in structures. He'd leave me notes and geometric proofs. His version of bedtime stories were structural load calculations, and you turned out to love buildings. Meyer said. Of course. A small smile. It was his language. I learned it so I could talk to him. Meyer was quiet for a moment. Then, did it work? Victoria wrapped her hands round her coffee cup. He died when I was 24. Heart attack. We had dinner the night before and talked about the Guggenheim for 2 hours, and I thought we had so much time left. She looked out the window. I still talk to him sometimes. In buildings, when a space works, when the light comes in exactly right, I think. He would have seen that. Meyer reached across the table and covered Victoria's hand with hers. It was a gentle, deliberate movement, unhurried. Victoria looked down at their hands. She didn't pull away. You're doing it again, she said softly. What? Being present? There were things Meyer didn't ask. She didn't ask about the accident. She didn't ask whether Victoria had been born with her disability or acquired it, because the answer was irrelevant to anything important. She didn't ask about the prognosis or the physical limitations or any of the 1,000 invasive questions that Victoria had clearly, from the careful walls of her, been asked many times before. What she did ask, one quiet Tuesday in late January, when snow was falling again and the cafe was nearly empty. What do you love most in your work? The thing that makes it worth all the rest of it. Victoria thought about this for a longer time than most people took to answer questions. This was one of the things Maya had come to love about her. She didn't give reflexive answers. She actually thought. The moment, Victoria said finally, when someone enters a space I've designed and doesn't notice the architecture. Maya tilted her head. You want people not to notice? I want them to feel. Without knowing why, Victoria turned her coffee cup in her hands. The best architecture is invisible. You walk into a room and you feel calm, or curious, or expansive, or safe, and you don't know it's the ceiling height doing it, or the way the light comes from the north. You just feel it. She looked at Meyer. I want to change how people feel in space without them knowing I've done it. Maya looked at her for a moment. That's the kindest kind of power, she said. Victoria stared at her. I've never heard anyone describe it that way. It's what you do, though. You make people feel things they didn't know they needed to feel. Maya paused. That's what you've been doing to me. The words came out before she'd fully decided to say them. The cafe was quiet. Snow fell outside in the particular unhurried way of January snow, as if it had nowhere else to be. Victoria was very still. Meyer, she began. You don't have to say anything, Meyer said quickly. I just wanted to be honest. You're always honest, and it seemed right. Victoria stopped. Started again. I'm not good at this. At what? She made a small, frustrated gesture with her hand that Maya had never seen her make. A crack in the composure. At wanting things. I stopped. After the accident. After Elena left, I made a decision that it was cleaner not to want things I couldn't plan for. And am I something you can't plan for? A long silence. You are profoundly, absolutely something I cannot plan for, Victoria said. And there was something in her voice underneath the precision, underneath the control, that was new. Something that might have been terrifying to her and sounded, to Meyer, like the most honest thing she'd ever said. It was a Saturday in February, not a regular day, not a scheduled visit, when Victoria's number appeared on Maya's phone for the first time. They had exchanged numbers 2 weeks earlier for logistics around the Decker project, which Victoria had quietly, without being asked, begun providing pro bono design consultation for through her firm. The number had not been used for or anything personal. Until now, the text said, I'm in front of your building. I apologize for not calling first. I was in the neighborhood, and then I was here and I'm not sure what I intended. Please ignore this if it's not. Maya was already at the window. The black van was parked outside. She could see Victoria's silhouette through the passenger window, and she could see the small, rigid posture that meant Victoria was in the process of talking herself back out of something. She texted back, "Give me 2 minutes." She came down in her socks, no time for shoes. Not for this, and knocked on the passenger window. Victoria lowered it. She was not wearing her blazer, just a dark sweater, which was the most casual Meyer had ever seen her. Her hair was slightly undone from its usual precision. She had been crying, not recently, but the evidence was there in the faint redness at her eyes. Carefully composed back into neutrality. I had a difficult day, Victoria said, in the tone of a person offering a factual report rather than asking for comfort. I know, Maya said. You don't, I can tell. Come up. I don't need to. Victoria. Maya said her name quietly, not with the careful, professional distance of Ms. Crane, but with the weight of actually knowing her. Come up. Maya's apartment was small and warm and full of plants, which Victoria noticed immediately. The professional eye cataloging the space even in distress. East-facing windows for the herbs. A grow light above the winter seedlings on the kitchen shelf. Stacks of gardening books alongside environmental science textbooks alongside novels. A hand-drawn map of the Decker Law on the wall. Photographs of a woman who was clearly Maya's mother, and a younger Meyer in what appeared to be a university greenhouse, laughing at something off dash camera. It was not a design space. It had accumulated, organically, into something that felt exactly like the person who lived in it. Victoria stopped in the middle of the small living room and looked around. This is your space, she said. Yes, it feels like you, Maya smiled. You say that like it surprises you. Most people don't live in spaces that feel like them. Victoria touched the edge of a terracotta pot on the windowsill, a careful, almost wondering touch. Most people live in spaces that happen to them. Maya made tea. She brought it to the low coffee table and sat on the floor beside it, not on the couch, which would have put her above Victoria's eye level, but on the floor, cross-legged, so they were even. She had done this without thinking. And when Victoria noticed it, and Victoria noticed everything, something in the careful architecture of her expression shifted. What happened today? Meyer asked. A pause. A meeting. My board of directors has been. She stopped. There's pressure to step back from active leadership. They couch it in language about wellness and sustainability. But what they mean is another stop. Harder this time. They mean they're not comfortable with the operational limitations. Your disability. My disability. Victoria said the words steadily. I've been CEO for 7 years. The firm has doubled in size. We've won 15 major awards, and they want to discuss a transition to a strategic advisory role. She said the last 6 words with such precise, controlled contempt that Maya felt it physically. Because I can't walk to a construction site. Can you do everything else the job requires? I can do everything the job requires. I use virtual site inspection. I have field architects I trust. The work is not compromised. Victoria's job was set, but the perception is their problem, Maya said. Victoria looked at her. That's easy to say. I know. Maya didn't soften it. It doesn't make it less true. Another silence. Then Victoria said, quietly, I used to be able to walk them through sites myself. I used to be. She stopped. This stop was different from the others, rougher at the edge. What? Meyer said softly. I used to walk, Victoria said, very quietly. Before, I was a runner. Actually, half marathons. I used to run along the river road every morning. A long pause. I don't mourn it every day anymore. I thought I would. But it's the body adjusts. The mind adjusts. You find the new shape of your life. She looked at her hands in her lap. But some days it returns. The loss. It comes back and sits next to you and doesn't say anything, and you just have to be in the same room with it. Maya reached over and took her hand. Fully this time, not a cover, a hold. Fingers interlaced, and she sat with it, the grief, the presence of it, not trying to resolve it or comfort it away, just staying. Victoria looked at their hands for a long moment. Then she looked at Maya. "Please don't hurt me," she said. It came out very quietly, almost inaudibly. "I know that. I know you can't promise that. And I'm not asking you to. She stopped, steadied herself. "I'm not good at surviving it twice. I know," Maya said. Her voice was steady. "I'm not asking you to trust me in advance of any proof. I'm just asking you to let me be here, tonight. And we'll see about the rest." Victoria nodded once. A small, precise movement, the kind that costs something. They sat together in the warm, plant-filled apartment for a long time, tea going cold between them, the city outside the windows doing its muffled February thing, and Maya's hand in Victoria's, and neither of them needing to say anything more. At 11:30, Victoria said she should go. Harold was waiting, patient as always, in the van. Maya walked her down at the van door. In the cold, they stood close, and Victoria looked at her with those silver eyes, full of something that had no clean name. "Thursday," Victoria said. "Before Thursday," Maya said. And this time, on impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a kiss to Victoria's cheek. Just that light, brief, deliberate. She felt Victoria go very still. Then, slowly, one of Victoria's hands came up and rested, gently, against Maya's face. They stayed like that for a moment, forehead nearly to forehead, breath clouding in the cold air. Then Maya stepped back. "Good night, Victoria. Good night, Maya." Her voice was different, softer at the edges, like something that had been tightly bound and was beginning, very carefully, to come loose. Harold, who was facing front with the windshield wiper discipline of a former military man, permitted himself a small smile as he drove his employer home. After February, things were different. They were different in ways that were visible. Victoria's visits became less scheduled, more spontaneous. She began calling in the evenings, not always about the Decker project, sometimes just to talk about something she'd read or seen or thought. She started arriving at the cafe before it opened, which Dora noticed and responded to by giving her a key with absolutely no ceremony whatsoever. "Your family now," Dora said, pressing the key into Victoria's hand on a Tuesday morning. "Don't make it weird." Victoria looked at the key. "I make most things weird," she said. "I know," Dora said. "I don't care." Coffee's on. They were different in ways that were less visible to in the texture of silences, which had changed from polite to comfortable, in the way Victoria's posture, always so controlled, relaxed incrementally when Maya was close, in the way Maya had started, without realizing it, to look at every space she entered and think, what would Victoria see here? They had not talked directly about what they were. They were operating in a space without a name, and Maya was choosing not to rush toward naming it, because she understood, more each day, that Victoria needed the territory to feel safe before she could commit to a map. What she was less prepared for was how undone she herself was becoming. She had been attracted to women before, had dated, had loved a little, had been hurt a moderate amount, the ordinary arithmetic of her emotional life. But this was different. This was the specific vertigo of caring about a person whose particularities had gotten so thoroughly under her skin that she couldn't imagine how she'd existed before them. The mathematical precision of Victoria's thinking, and the deep feeling that lived underneath it like groundwater, and the way she looked at structures of any kind, buildings or senses or relationships, with that focused, illuminating attention. Maya was. She was beginning to understand, entirely in love with her. And she had no idea what to do with it except keep showing up. The board review was in March, a formal presentation Victoria had been preparing for 3 weeks, and which she had mentioned only once to Maya, in passing, with the flat inflection of someone who was not going to make a big deal of something that was in fact enormous. Maya found out from Harold, who had the decency to tell her the correct date. On the morning of the review, Maya arrived at the cafe doors before it opened and baked, which she did not normally do, as Dora handled all baking a lemon and cardamom cake that her mother had taught her was the right thing to make when someone needed to feel that someone was in their corner. She boxed it. She put a note on it. The note said, "You have built more in 7 years than most architects build in a lifetime. They are lucky to have you, not the other way around." She texted Harold, who came and collected the box at 7:15 and delivered it to Victoria's apartment before she left for the meeting. Victoria texted at 7:40, "You made a cake, Meyer. My mother's recipe." Victoria, "I'm not sure how to respond to this. Meyer. You don't have to. Go be formidable." Victoria, "That's the easiest part." At 3:15, Victoria texted, "They're not restructuring my role. We reached a compromise on the construction site accessibility protocol. I also may have shown them a 12-point presentation on adaptive site inspection technologies that I apparently had ready." Meyer actually laughed aloud in the middle of the cafe. "Startling to customers. Of course you did." She texted back, "Are you okay?" A pause, longer than a text pause. "I'm better than okay. Can I come to the cafe? I know it's not Thursday." Maya looked at Dora, who was watching her with the expression of someone who has been married 40 years and knows what it looks like. "Come whenever you want." Maya texted, "We have cake left." The Decker lot was still frozen in March, but by April, when the permit cleared and the first planning meeting was scheduled, the ground was beginning to soften. Victoria came to the site meeting. Meyer had not expected this, had imagined it might be too physical, too complicated, the ground still uneven and the access paths not yet established. But Victoria came, in the van, in her work clothes, with a rolled site plan across her lap and Harold at her shoulder, and she spent 3 hours in the April sun with Simone Park and the Land Trust Committee and Meyer, talking through the design of the accessible raised beds, the path widths, the orientation of the tools relative to the prevailing wind, the placement of the community pavilion that would eventually serve as both a workshop space and a gathering point. She was extraordinary to watch. This, Meyer thought, was what lit up looked like in full Victoria in her element. The professional and the person aligned, drawing quick amendments on the site plan, asking Simone questions that reframed the whole access design in a way that made 3 people say oh simultaneously. "The pavilion should be lower than the garden beds," Victoria said, sketching on the plan. "Counterintuitive. Normally you'd want a clear sightline from the gathering space, but if the beds are slightly elevated and the pavilion sits at ground level in the center, you create a sense of the garden embracing the community space. Envelopment rather than oversight." She paused. "It also makes the accessible path distances shorter for anyone with mobility limitations, because the center is the lowest point." Simone looked at her. "You designed that for the users." "Of course." Victoria's tone made it clear this was the only possible choice. Meyer, standing slightly behind her, felt something so full and warm move through her that she had to press her lips together to keep it from showing on her face. She failed, somewhat. Simone, across the site plan, caught Maya's expression and widened her eyes fractionally in the expression of a woman recognizing something that has been coming for a long time. Later, when the meeting had ended and Simone and the committee had gone and Harold had given them privacy, he was very good at giving them privacy. Meyer and Victoria were alone on the site. The van parked on the gravel access path, the April light going golden. "The garlic goes here," Victoria said, pointing at the northeastern bed. "6 weeks ago was the right time, but we've missed it. We'll plant it in the fall." Maya looked at her. "You've been thinking about the garlic." "I've been reading about it," Victoria said. "Matter-of-factly, you've been researching my garden." "Our garden." Victoria said it quickly and then stopped, as if she hadn't quite meant to say her. She looked at the bed she'd been pointing to. "The project." "I've been researching the project." Maya crouched down beside the wheelchair, so they were eye level, and looked at her. The April light was in Victoria's hair, and she was not wearing her usual precision. There was silk from the side on her jacket sleeve, and her hair had come slightly loose. and she was looking at the garden beds with an expression that was entirely unguarded. "Victoria," Maya said. Victoria looked at her. "I'm in love with you." Maya said it quietly, clearly, without preamble. The way she'd decided she would if she ever said it. No runway, no softening, just the truth. Victoria went very still. The kind of stillness that is not absence, but it's opposite, the stillness of something on the verge of change. "I know this is fast," Maya continued. "I know you have reasons to be careful. I'm not asking you to be anything you're not. I'm just telling you what's true. Because you deserve the truth and because I've been carrying it for months. And it's gotten heavy." The April wind moved through the site. The city hummed its usual quiet hum. A bird, a sparrow. Maya noted automatically. Resident species. Good sign for the garden. Landed on the future garlic bed and looked at them with one bright, unconcerned eye. Victoria said, "I'm terrified. I know. I don't know how to." She stopped. Her hands were on her wheels, not moving. "After the accident, after Eleanor, I built myself back up. And I designed the rebuild very carefully. I left space for work, and for discipline, and for Harold, and for a breath. I didn't leave space for this, because you didn't think it was coming. Because I didn't think I could bear it if it didn't work." Her voice was very quiet now. I don't have the luxury of breezy optimism about what relationships look like. I know what my life requires. I know what I require. I have health appointments and medical logistics and bad days when my pain is significant, and I am not an easy person to love. "I didn't ask for easy," Maya said. "I asked for you." A long silence. Then Victoria said, in a voice that sounded like something being rebuilt from the foundation up, "I'm in love with you too. I have been since you fixed the floorboard." Maya made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry. She reached up and took Victoria's face in her hands gently, as if handling something both strong and precious, and Victoria closed her eyes. "Okay," Maya said softly. "Okay." Victoria agreed. The sparrow on the garlic bed watched them with philosophical equanimity and flew away. What followed was not a romance of grand gestures. It was the quieter, more durable kind, the love that builds itself in the accumulation of ordinary days. Maya learned that Victoria awoke before 5 and was at her drafting table before sunrise, and that the hours between 5 and 7 were sacred and should not be disrupted. She learned that Victoria had a dry, absurdist humor that surfaced unexpectedly. She had once sent Maya a carefully annotated critique of a romantic comedy they'd watched together, formatted as a structural engineering report, with sections titled "Load-Bearing Plot Elements" and "Aesthetic Failures." She learned that Victoria cried exactly twice, once when she talked about her father, and once watching a documentary about a prairie restoration project, which she was embarrassed about and which Maya found entirely endearing. She learned the rhythms of chronic pain, days when Victoria's injury site was inflamed and she moved with careful economy and spoke less, and the days when it was manageable and she was electric with energy. She learned not to treat the bad days as crises or the good days as a return to normal, but to take each day as its own thing. She learned to ask, "How's your pain today?" the way one asks about the weather, casually, as a thing worth knowing, not a problem to be solved. She learned that Victoria's independence was not a wall, but a value, and that the best way to support her was to offer clearly, accept no's gracefully, and never, ever do something for her that she hadn't asked for help with. Victoria learned Maya's rhythms too. She learned that Maya thought best while moving, while walking, or gardening, or cooking, and that stillness made her restless, and that this was not a temperamental failing, but simply how her mind was aped. She learned that Maya's enthusiasm was not performance, but genuine metabolic function. She was a person who was fully, authentically delighted by things, and that the delight was contagious, and that being in proximity to it for extended periods had the unexpected effect of making Victoria's own world feel more habitable. She learned that Maya's mother, Celestini, who arrived in their life in May, small and fierce and immediately, unambiguously certain about, Victoria would hug her without warning and address her as baby, and that this was simply how Celestini operated and was not her commentary on Victoria's ability to manage her own life. She learned that Celestine's tomatoes, grown in fire escape buckets, were extraordinary. She eventually, quietly, commissioned a custom-designed rooftop garden structure for the building's flat roof as a gift, explaining it to Celestini as a structural exercise and watching Celestini look at her for a moment and then pull her into the kind of hug that admitted no resistance. "You're keeping her," Celestini told Meyer. Later, "That's the plan," Maya said. They were not immune to difficulty. There was a day in June when Victoria came from a site meeting to find the cafe closed, a private event, and couldn't reach Meyer, and the accumulation of a hard week expressed itself in a text that was sharper than intended. And Meyer, coming off a long shift and operating on 4 hours of sleep, answered in kind, and by evening there was a silence between them that had the particular temperature of an unresolved argument. It was Victoria who broke it. She called, not texted. "Called at 10 p.m. I was unkind," she said immediately. "So was I," Maya said. "I was unkind first." I matched it. A pause. "I was frustrated about the meeting. The contractor was dismissive about the accessible ramp specifications on the Millfield project. He used the words 'in a perfect world,' and I nearly said something that would have ended the professional relationship. What did you say instead?" I said, "In this world, which is the one we are building in, the specifications are as stated." And then I left before I said the other thing. Maya exhaled. "That's actually pretty good." It was not cathartic, no. But it was right. A pause. "I'm sorry," I snapped. "I was tired and I took it out on you. I'm sorry I texted instead of calling. I knew I was in a difficult mood and I should have waited." A silence, but a different one now, softer. "I don't want to fight with you," Victoria said. "I don't want to fight with you either." Maya tucked the phone against her shoulder, sitting in her small kitchen surrounded by her plants in the June warmth. "But I think we probably will sometimes. I think that's part of it. I know." A pause. "I'm not good at conflict. I was raised in a house of mathematical silence. We didn't argue, we simply ceased engaging until equilibrium was restored." "That sounds lonely." "It was quite lonely, yes. We can argue," Maya said. "We're just going to also apologize after, deal?" "That sounds like a reasonable protocol," Victoria said, and Maya could hear, unmistakably, the warmth in it, the barely suppressed Victoria smile, the one she'd been learning to recognize by sound. "Come to the cafe tomorrow," Maya said. "I'll have your coffee ready." "I know you will," Victoria said, and she said it with such simple certainty, the certainty of someone who is beginning, carefully, to trust that Maya held the phone to her chest after the call ended and just breathed. Summer brought the community garden into its first full season. The raised beds were planted. The accessible pots were in. The pavilion lower than the beds, enveloping rather than overlooking, was framed in reclaimed timber and had become, already, exactly what Victoria had predicted, a place people chose to stay. On the first Saturday of June, the South End Community Garden had its opening day. Celestini was there, Dora was there, Harold was there, in a linen shirt rather than his driving clothes, looking somehow both relaxed and exactly himself. Simone Park cut the ribbon. Children Meyer had grown up seeing on her street ran between the beds and immediately began touching everything. Victoria was there, in the June sun, in a lightweight blazer with the sleeves pushed up, site plan on her lap, watching with an expression that Maya had come to understand was her version of beaming. A journalist from the local paper, the South End Herald, a small publication with large community credibility, came to cover the opening and spoke to Meyer for 15 minutes about the vision, the funding, the collaborative process. At the end, the journalist said, "Who designed the pavilion and path structure? It's beautifully done." "Victoria Crane," Maya said. "Of Crane and Holloway." The journalist looked across the garden to where Victoria was answering a question from one of the Land Trust Committee members. "She did this pro bono?" "Yes, why?" Maya looked at Victoria across the garden, the careful precision of her, and the brightness that lived underneath it, and the way she was, just in this moment, letting both be visible, and said, because she cares, and because she's someone who understands that the best spaces are made for the people who will live in them. The journalist wrote it down. The article ran the following Thursday. The headline was, "A Garden Grows in the South End, How One Community's Vision Took Root." And buried in the third paragraph, and remarked upon, was the sentence, "The accessible design was provided pro bono by architect Victoria Crane, whose firm cited a commitment to community-centered design." Victoria read it Thursday morning at the window table. Meyer watched her read it. She saw the moment the sentence registered a small stillness, a careful, deliberate placement of the paper on the table. "You told them," Victoria said. "You did the work," Meyer said. Victoria looked out the window. The summer morning was full of light. I'm careful about how much of myself appears in the public." "This wasn't about you," Maya said gently. "This was about the garden, and about what you made." She paused. "You're allowed to have done something good and have people know about it." A long moment. The journalist asked why I designed it. Victoria said, "I told her." "What did you say?" Maya met her eyes. "I told her you care." Victoria held her gaze. Then she looked out the window again. And she did the thing she had been doing, increasingly. In Maya's presence, she let herself be seen, not performing composure, not managing an image, just sitting in the window light of the cafe on a Thursday morning, with her coffee and her laptop and the newspaper. "Noan, I should tell you something," she said, after a moment. "Okay, when I first came here the first Thursday, I had been advised by my therapist to identify a third place. Not work, not home. A place with no agenda." She paused. "I chose here because the accessibility modifications were recent, and the Yelp reviews mentioned good coffee. Romantic origins," Maya said, a very small smile. "I was not, at that time, intending for it to become this." "What did it become?" Victoria looked at her. "You know what it became. Tell me anyway." "It became," Victoria said, carefully and precisely, as she did all important things, "the place I most want to be." There was an evening in July, long, golden, the kind that seems to have extra hours in it, when they were at Maya's apartment, the windows open, a dinner that had become an extended conversation, that had become a stillness, the two of them on the floor of the living room with the low coffee table between them, the city settling into its summer evening sounds outside. Victoria said, "I want to tell you something I haven't told anyone." Maya set down her tea, waited. "After the accident," Victoria said slowly, "when Elena left, I made a decision. I told myself I was choosing independence, choosing focus, choosing my work, and I did choose those things. And I don't regret them." She paused. "But I was also afraid, specifically afraid, that asking someone to love me with all the logistical complexity of my life, with the medical appointments, and the equipment, and the bad days, was asking too much, that I was too much." The word sat in the room, and Meyer understood what it had cost her to say it. "So I removed the question," Victoria continued. "I decided I wouldn't ask. I wouldn't seek it. I would be excellent at my work and sufficient in my life, and I would not." Her voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. "I would not risk finding out that I was right." Meyer was quiet for a moment. Then she said, And now, I have apparently fallen entirely in love with a waitress who grows things, and fixes floorboards, and makes cake when I'm frightened. And the question is no longer theoretical." She looked at Meyer with the full weight of those silver eyes. "I am terrified of being too much, and I am choosing to be here anyway." Maya moved around the coffee table and sat next to her on the floor, at her level, and took her hand. "You are not too much," she said. "You are exactly the right amount of a very specific person, and I have been completely unable to be interested in anyone else since the Thursday you told me my garlic schedule was wrong." Victoria made a sound that was unmistakably a laugh, a real one, not the slight smile Meyer had been cataloging and treasuring. A real laugh, warm and unguarded and entirely unarchitected. Meyer had never heard it before. It rearranged something in her chest permanently. "Your garlic schedule was wrong," Victoria said, still laughing slightly. My garlic schedule was wrong, Meyer agreed. And you had looked it up. I had looked it up. Because you cared. Because I cared. Victoria shook her head. I was very annoyed about caring. I had an entire organized system for not caring. How's that system working out? Catastrophically, Victoria said, and she was still smiling, and the summer light was doing something remarkable to the planes of her face. And Maya leaned forward and kissed her properly, at last, without the brevity of a cheek, without the restraint of an almost moment, just fully, with all the months of accumulated knowing behind it. Victoria kissed her back with the same precision she brought to everything, which was to say, completely by September a year, almost, since the black van had first pulled into the accessible parking spot outside the Magnolia Cafe. Meyer and Victoria had built something that neither of them had quite expected, and both of them had, in different ways, stopped believing was possible. It was not a conventional arrangement. Victoria's apartment was designed for her life. The clearances, the bathroom configuration, the drafting table at the right height. Maya's apartment was full of plants and creative chaos and fire escape herbs. They did not move in together. Not yet. That conversation was ongoing, and they were approaching it with the care of two people who understood that shared space is its own kind of architecture, requiring both intention and time. What they had was this: the cafe on Thursday mornings, and Tuesdays now, and sometimes Saturdays. Phone calls in the evening that lasted until midnight. The garden on Decker Avenue, where Victoria had, without announcing she was going to, ordered a custom-made all-terrain wheelchair for site visits and appeared one morning in October wearing garden glow. Thus, Sunday dinners at Celestine's, where Harold had somehow also begun appearing regularly, and where he and Celestine had developed a friendship based on strong opinions about both horticulture and jazz, and they had each other the specific, irreducible, and planned thing that they had grown, in the way of all living things, from a cracked open seed of vulnerability and a willingness to stay. There was one moment in October, the 1-year mark, that Maya thought about often afterward as the day everything became fully real. They had been leaving the garden together after a late Saturday work session. Victoria had been reviewing the winter bed preparation. Meyer had been planting the garlic that they had been planning since January. It was late afternoon, the light go in amber, the kind of day that presents itself like a gift. On the access ramp from the garden to the parking area, the same beautiful accessible ramp that Victoria had designed, with the 120 slope and the tactile warning strips and the solid, safe surface. The wheel of Victoria's chair caught on a piece of equipment that hadn't been returned to storage properly. The chair tipped. It happened very fast. Victoria's hands went to the wheels immediately. The reflex was practiced, exact, but the angle was bad, and she was going over, and Meyer was close enough. She caught her, both hands on Victoria's shoulders, taking the weight, the moment of absolute, total instability, and then steady. The chair righted. Maya's heart was in her throat. Victoria was still, hands gripping the wheels, breathing carefully. "I've got you," Meyer said. Her voice was completely steady. This surprised her slightly, given that her hands were shaking. "I know," Victoria said. "Nah, I'm fine. Nah, I've got it. Just, I know." They stayed like that for a moment, Maya's hands on her shoulders, Victoria's hands on her wheels, the October air around them, and the garden behind them, and the life they had built, carefully and honestly, in the space between. Then Meyer said, "The equipment. I'll fix it." "I know you will," Victoria said. And later, when they were in the van and Harold was driving them home, and the city was doing its October thing with the amber light and the early dark, Victoria reached across and took Maya's hand and held it for the entire drive. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Papa Dimitriou had been running the Magnolia Cafe for 22 years, and she had seen, in those years, a considerable range of human drama. Births announced over coffee, divorces dissolve over pie, one proposal to breakups, and a medical emergency that had required her to use a defibrillator she had insisted on acquiring in 2019 over her accountant's objections. She had also, over the course of several decades, developed strong opinions about love. These opinions she shared freely when asked and occasionally when not. On a Thursday in November, a year and some months after a black van had first pulled into her accessible parking spot, Dora sat down to coffees at the window table without being asked, because by now she simply knew, and looked at Meyer and Victoria sitting together in the morning light. Victoria was explaining a structural principle using a salt shaker and a sugar bowl. Meyer was listening with her chin in her hand and her eyes bright. Doris stood for a moment, then she said, to no one in particular, to the cafe, to the November morning, to the accumulated wisdom of 22 years, this is what it looks like. When it's real, neither Meyer nor Victoria heard her. They were deep in the architecture of something. Dora went back to her counter, poured herself a coffee, and smiled. May, the second spring, the South End Community Garden was in its second season. The garlic planted in the fall, in Victoria's designated northeastern bed, exactly on schedule, had come up in tight, determined rows. The accessible pavilion had become what Victoria had said it would, a place people chose to stay. On weekday afternoons, it was full of children doing homework. On weekends, it held cooking workshops, self science classes, seed exchanges. A small plaque on the pavilion's eastern wall read, "Designed by Victoria Crane, built by this community." Maya had arranged the plaque without telling her. Victoria had come to the garden on a May morning and found it and sat in front of it for a very long time without saying anything. Then she had turned to Meyer, who was kneeling in the garlic bed, and said, "You put my name on our building. It is your building," Maya said. "It's the community's building. And you made it for them." Maya sat back on her heels and looked at her. "You get to be credited for that." A long silence. Victoria looked at the plaque. Then she looked at Maya, and she was not composed. For a moment she was simply herself, an architected, all the warmth and precision and private vastness of her. In the May morning, "Come here," Meyer said. Softly. Victoria wheeled to the bed's edge, where Meyer was kneeling, and they were eye level, and Maya put her hands on either side of Victoria's face, and Victoria's eyes closed. "I never thought," Victoria said quietly, "that I would have this. What? Someone who puts my name on things." Her voice was low. "Someone who sees the parts of me that I built the walls to protect and treats them as worth protecting." "They are worth protecting," Maya said, "and I'm not going anywhere." "I know," Victoria said, and this time it was not a statement of endurance or of managing uncertainty. It was something else. The voice of a person who has been loved long enough and carefully enough to believe it. Maya kissed her there, in the May garden, in the morning light, beside the garlic that had come up exactly and scheduled around them. The city went about its business. The sparrows were back resident species, a good sign, flitting between the beds. Harold and Celestini were in the pavilion with coffee, having a vigorous argument about which of them had the correct position on composting ratios. The garden grew, the people in it stayed, and the love that had started with a spilled coffee and a fixed floorboard and to women in a window full of morning light quiet, particular and entirely unplanned, continued to do what all real things do. It put down roots. It reached toward the sun. It grew.